Today and do another quick little video. Today, I'm going to be talking about crawling and why crawling is an important milestone and why you don't want your baby to skip this important milestone. And the reason for this video topic today is because I hear all the time from pediatricians and doctors. I hear it more from moms who have gone to their pediatrician or their doctor, and they have been told that, oh, it's okay if your baby didn't crawl. No big deal. It's not a big deal. It's not a very important milestone. And recently, over the past few days, the CDC and the American Association of Pediatrics actually revised their developmental milestone guidelines without the input of any allied health professionals like speech therapists, physical therapists, or occupational therapists. And they took crawling out. And so they are basically saying that crawling is no longer a milestone, which angers me. And it's totally baffling. And it really makes no sense as to why this is no longer a milestone. And the truth of the matter is that, yes, babies these days in our society today are showing delays in their motor skills, and many of them do skip the crawling phase. However, just because something is common does not make it normal. Okay. And so today I really wanted to talk about crawling and why crawling is so important. And also to, show you a little bit of some crawling mini milestones, but to really get you thinking in terms of, okay, every milestone actually has a reason. It's developing muscles in your body. It is developing spinal curves. There's so many reasons for all the milestones, all of the developmental milestones. So rolling, crawling, getting into sitting independently, getting into standing independently, finally cruising, and then walking independently as well. Each of those positions and motor milestones offers a whole host of development and learning and muscle strength that your baby is getting from those. So let's talk about crawling specifically. So crawling on hands and knees usually happens around, anywhere between 7 to 9, maybe sometimes 10 months on the later end for babies. And crawling on the hands and knees is a really important milestone because if you think about it, put yourself in that sort of tabletop position on your hands and knees. You're getting a lot of input through your hands. You're getting strength through your hand muscles. You're getting strength through your arms. You're getting strength through your shoulders. You're developing your core strength in the front, but also in the back. Then you take some steps forward and you are getting the bilateral coordination, learning how to use your body in opposition, but also together, the two sides of your body together, but in opposition. And when you look down at the ground where you are and then over to your destination, you're actually working on the near and far vision. Okay. So there's a lot of development that happens just from that position of being on your hands and knees for a few months of this strengthening. The other thing with crawling is that this position of being on your hands and knees actually develops that last curve in your spinal cord, or your spinal curvature. Babies are born with a very C-shaped spine, and we as adults have a more S-shaped spine. So we have a curve in the neck, and then it curves down through the mid back, and then it curves again in the low back. So it's sort of like an S-shaped spine. And this is really what allows us to be able to take in that downward force, that downward pressure, and be able to manage that properly without putting too much strain on our body structure. So it kind of cushions or disperses the force more appropriately. And so crawling, getting into that hands and knees position for crawling is one of the ways that lumbar curve in the low back, that's the sort of the final curve to develop, that's one of the ways that it starts to develop. So crawling is very, very important. Now, there are definitely some pre-crawling mini milestones, I like to call them. that you really do want to watch for as well, because they also have a whole host of development that happens with them, but also lots of benefits. But you still want your baby to get into that hands and knees position to do the rocking, because that's going to help to integrate their primitive reflex of the symmetric tonic neck reflex. And if that is not integrated, I'll do another video on primitive reflexes. But if primitive reflexes are not integrated fully, that can lead to various things. And specifically, the symmetric tonic neck reflex, if that is not inhibited properly, then I'm just going to pull up my little chart here. If the symmetric tonic neck reflex is not properly integrated, then that can lead to things like tendency to slump while sitting. I wonder why, because you actually don't have the core strength to be able to sit upright, or all of the curves nicely developed to be able to maintain that pressure downward. Also, poor muscle tone, W sitting, because you also don't have the core strength, so you are using a wider base of support. Poor eye-hand coordination, inability to sit still and to concentrate. So interesting, because all of those are definitely things that your child might demonstrate later on if they don't crawl. In my occupational therapy practice, when I used to do more traditional occupational therapy, and I worked in a sensory clinic all over the place, I saw mainly kids from about 3 until 6 or 7. And lots of those children who had the fine motor difficulties, who were wiggling in their chairs, who were falling out of their chairs, who were like, oh my God, I can't sit up straight while I'm in class, who had all sorts of behaviors in class, who were not able to attend and focus, who had difficulties copying from the board. Guess what? Most of those babies, those children did not crawl. And so I'm not saying that if your child didn't crawl, they're for sure going to have all of these other difficulties. No, that's not the case either, because there's a lot of different ways that you can get these skills. But as you can see, crawling has so many benefits that you do not get if you just stand up and walk one day. Okay? When you just get up and walk, you do not get all of the input through your hands. So you're not developing all of the fine little muscles of the hands, which are going to lead to fine motor skills, which are going to lead to handwriting and printing and all of those things, holding a pencil properly. You also don't get the strengthening through the arms or through the shoulder to really be able to manage like stability. You also don't get the core strength in the same way that you do when you are on your hands and knees. And so all of these can lead to delays later on in various aspects of your life. So taking crawling out as a milestone is just plain wrong. Now, I will say this. I don't necessarily care if your child walks before they crawl, but crawling is an important milestone in and of itself. Okay. And it angers me when I hear, and frustrates me when I hear that pediatricians have told their clients that crawling is not important, and oh, it's okay if your child didn't crawl. No big deal. Because they don't actually have the training to tell you that. They don't have all the intricate details of what happens in infant development. I also just watched a documentary that's not new, but it was new to me. I've heard about it before, but I hadn't made the time to watch it. And there was a specific episode on crawling. It's called The Babies, I think Babies documentary on Netflix. And there's one whole hour that is based on crawling. And it really talks about how crawling is actually an innate part of our being as humans, because we actually did evolve from mammals who walked on 4 feet, right? Who crawled. And it's just us humans who have gotten up onto 2 feet and gone about our lives in that upright position. But the other thing, they went on 55 minutes talking about how crawling develops, how it's present at birth. They did all sorts of research looking at babies, doing the breast crawl right at birth, but also babies when they were put into water as a newborn had a very sort of innate crawling ability. And then literally at the very end, they're like, oh, but it's okay if your baby skips crawling. And I was like, why would you make a documentary for 55 minutes of like the importance of crawling. And then at the very end, just throw in a little thing about like, oh, all babies are different. It's totally fine if your baby skips that stage. It's not fine. They didn't talk about the development. They didn't talk about all of the benefits of what crawling does to your body, to your brain connections. They didn't talk about the primitive reflexes that crawling and getting into that hands and knees positioning and rocking back and forth allows you to do. They didn't talk about the strengthening. They didn't talk about all of the problems that might result as a result of not crawling. And so it is really important for your babies to crawl. It is something that you really want to encourage. I know that once your baby starts to walk, if they haven't crawled yet, it's so hard to get them on the ground. Get on the ground with them. Get a tunnel from IKEA. Go through the tunnel. There's only one way through. You're either on your hands and knees or you're pulling yourself on your belly, which, by the way, is a mini crawling milestone. So let me just chat about those before I say goodbye, because I don't want to keep this video too long. But crawling mini milestones. So usually babies, when they're doing tummy time, they will start to often push with their hands, and they kind of go in this backwards motion. Okay. So that is a crawling mini milestone. Then they might be able to pull themselves forward with their hands, not really using their feet, but they're really pulling themselves forward, kind of like a modified army crawl. Then you might see that they do this thing where they're like doing a 360 because they figured out how to use one hand and one leg to get themselves around. Then they might actually do like one hand and one arm to go forward in sort of more of that army crawl type crawling. Then eventually they get onto their hands and knees and they do a little rocking and then a face plant to do a little army crawl, because that's usually faster initially. And then finally they get onto their hands and knees and then they start crawling forward. And that is so hugely important. Yes, all of those mini milestones also do lots of strengthening, lots of developing, but it's really getting onto their hands and knees and doing that rocking and then taking those bilateral coordinated kind of movements forward. That is going to be so beneficial for your babies. They do not get that when they stand up and walk. So get down on the floor, crawling through tunnels, crawling on the floor with them, crawling over cushions, make little obstacle courses where they have to get down and crawl for part of it. Crawling up the stairs is another really great way to get that in. Also, climbing ladders. If you have older children and you're like, oh my gosh, my child didn't crawl and now they have all of these issues. I've had a lot of people reach out to me because of that. Crawling up the ladders, crawling up the slide. Let your children crawl up the slide. There's so much development happening with that. Okay, that is it. I'm getting off my soapbox. I want to keep this video short and I have to go pick up my kids. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some useful information. I hope that now you know that crawling is an important milestone, regardless of what the CDC says, regardless of what the American Association of Pediatrics says, regardless of what your pediatrician or doctor says. Crawling is important. You want your babies to crawl. You want your children to crawl. If they didn't crawl, you want to get them on the floor or climbing on the playground structures so that they are going to get the different inputs, the core strengthening, the arm strengthening, the bilateral coordination, the visual tracking from near to far. You want them to crawl. That's it. Bye, everyone.